Hi, Bowie New Life Assembly. This is Pastor Charles. Welcome to our Wednesday night Bible study. The format's going to be a little different. Remember, I mentioned that sometimes we'll deviate from our normal Bible study and include some other things, and that's what we're doing tonight. The Lord had it on my heart to share with you and other pastors in a interview format, and I had one pastor line up to in something that I call pastor to pastor, similar to our men to boys ministry that we have here, but we were not able to get it taped because of his schedule. And during that time, Pastor Mark, a layman from Crosstown, Cornerstone Assemblies of God, called me, and we got into a discussion about what is going on in America concerning systemic racism. And from that conversation, he asked if I would share with his people on a Zoom call. I said, okay. And so that's how this came about. Now, as you watch the call, remember that I don't know what he's going to ask. He knows a lot about me because we go back over 26 years. And so as he's asking the questions, I'm answering the questions. But the other thing about it is what we agreed on is not to put some things on tape. We don't agree on everything. We agree to disagree. And so you won't find those things on tape. But as you're watching the tape, I want you to see if the Lord is speaking to your heart. Also, if you have a question, then in the chat, just write what the question is, and I'll try to respond to you. All right. Get in your seats, put on your seat belts, and let's get ready to take off for a wonderful time with Pastor Mark Lehman from Cornerstone Assemblies of God as we discuss the affairs of America, the affairs of nation. I'm referring to race the race this morning, tonight. God bless you.
First of all, Pastor Charles, thank you so much for your patience. And people are joining us here. And as you do join us tonight, can I just say this is my good friend, Pastor Charles Galbreath, who about 26 and a half years ago came to me and introduced himself as, at that time, probably you weren't the oldest, longest serving pastor in Bowie at that time.
No.
And now you are, I think, pretty close to that point. So I want to say Pastor Charles has been a friend, and over the years we have just enjoyed so much the conversations together, but especially the conversations now about racism that we have had for years and years and years. So people are on here now too, so which is great. So please welcome Pastor Charles Galbreath. Will you welcome Pastor Charles?
Hi, Pastor Mark. I appreciate you, and I would like to thank you and also your church for praying for me through the challenges I had with cancer back during this winter from December till God healed me over in March. You've been a friend to this church and to this pastor. That was a ministry I think I had probably for about a decade, where a new pastor would come in. I would call him up and say, hey, guy, hey, can we get together? I just want to put a voice with a face. And so I think we met at a local restaurant and visited. And as you said, over the years, we've been in several pastoral prayer groups, praying, and then just meeting individually. And I know I can pick up the phone and call you and say, look, give me a perspective from this. And the same with you as to what's going on as far as the Christian world is concerned.
Well, I want to talk about, too, if you can, just for a moment, the sort of what you went through with the health scare and how that all processed out and how God has touched your body. Can you talk about that for a minute, Pastor?
Yes. I was going along. I thought I was fine. And I was walking every day, and then I began to get a growth on my head, and I had a problem with my foot. And so I went to my doctor. My doctor said to me, he said, well, let's take a look at some things. And he called me back and he said, well, I got good news and bad news. This is the way he broke it to me, Pastor Mark. He said, the good news is what's happening with your leg and your head are the same. And I said, well, what's the bad news? He said, well, you got cancer. And that was December 13th. And that changes your life when people tell you, because I had multiple myeloma. And I'm thinking, oh, man, I've got grandchildren, I've got a wife, I'm pastoring a church. Long story short, pastors like yourself and from around the country, they began to pray. And on March 5th, the Lord, I went back in for a checkup, and the doctor said, I checked your numbers. Your numbers were 1,000, wherever. He said, now they're 0. My wife and I looked at one another, and he went right on to something else. But you know, there's a problem with your liver and the, he said, whoa, wait, doctor, did you say that our numbers are now 0? He said, yes, so you're cancer free. So thank you for that. And I was able to really resume preaching probably towards the end of March, but from all of January, the latter part of January, I had to have other pastors come in and cover for me.
Well, I think all these years, and of course, you pastor Bowie New Life Assembly here in Bowie,
Yeah.
and a wonderful congregation that has always been diverse from the very beginning. I remember before you had the location there, you were meeting in another location that was diverse there. It's still diverse, and we thank God for that very, very much. So what I want to do, guys, and we're on Facebook, guys, and so for those who are looking for it on YouTube, please just move over to Facebook if you could. We will record this and post it later, if Pastor Charles is okay with it after we're done, to make sure we're good with this. But I want you to know, if I can, just very openly and honestly, that this friend of mine is very transparent and very open. And we've talked here for a few minutes beforehand just about processing some things. So I'd like to, if you can, and you mentioned this again, Pastor Charles, before, but just sort of talk about your story, because we're just getting on Facebook now. Get on your stories, how you came, where you came from, and sort of the process there.
I grew up on a farm. My father was a sharecropper. I grew up on a farm in North Carolina, and I'm the last of 8 children, and I'm the second child to actually go off to college, North Carolina A&T State University, which is a historical Black college, and I majored in economics and minor in statistics. And so once I finished college, I worked briefly for Environmental Protection Agency for about a year as an occupational analyst. It wasn't in my field, but look, at that time I needed a job. I needed to eat, so I took whatever they offered. And then I got an opportunity to work for a Swiss-based company, and they sent me to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. After training, about 13 weeks of training, they sent me to Carlisle, Pennsylvania. They just called me up one day and said, look, go to west of the Susquehanna, and you need to find a home over there because you got 9 counties over there. So I went up there. Now, remember, now I'm from the South. Now, I had traveled a lot because on the Environmental Protection Agency job, I covered everything east of the Mississippi. So I had seen a lot of the country. So once I got to Carlisle, I really wasn't prepared for what Carlisle was like, because back in those days, actually I was in Carlisle probably about 6 weeks before I ever saw a Black person. And so everybody,
that's your territory.
In my territory, right? I mean, I would travel and I would call. So everybody, for those 7.5 years that I ministered in Adams County, Juniata County, Cumberland County, for those 7.5 years, everybody I called on, everybody I interacted with, except 2 people, they were Caucasians, whites. There was a Black salesman from Monsanto that he worked for Monsanto for a short period. And over in Shippensburg, Cumberland Valley Co-op had a Black employee that worked in the docks loading trucks. And outside of that, it was all you guys.
And so, I mean, that had to be a shock.
It was, and coming from the South too, because the South and the North is different. So I had preconceived ideas about how whites acted and what they did. And in those 7.5 years that I was serving there, working there, what I noticed was that the Lord, every preconceived idea I had about him, he would wipe it away. He would just destroy it. And so about 2 years in, I think I got married. And after I got married, I got saved. And so for probably about 5 years, I was saved there. And we did find some Black people. I was coming back across the mountains. I tell this story. I was coming back across the mountains on 34, going back into Carlisle. And again, I'd been there 6 weeks and hadn't seen anybody. And I come across, and there's a car of Black people parked over on the pull-off. And I stopped my car, and I ran back to the car, and I looked, and I said, "Hey, you guys are Black." And they all just looked at me and laughed. And so I said, "Well, where does the Black people hang out?" And so they told me where they hang out, and they told me about the Black churches that was there. And so after we got saved, we started attending a Black church that was there. So, but that was my introduction to a world that was different from myself.
So I want to go back first, and then we're going to come back to that point. Okay. So you had told me the other day, we talked about this last week, and when we were having a conversation about some stuff, you talked about I think you said you were a freshman when Dr. Martin Luther King was assassanated
That's
in
correct.
college. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so, go ahead,
No,
please.
no, you go ahead.
No, no, please. Because you were talking about sort of the feeling of anger. And then the next year you said there was a classmate of yours that was shot,
Yes.
probably by police officers,
Yes.
A person that you knew. And that was just like 68 and 69, you said. And then can you just talk about sort of at that moment, you're not saved yet, right? You're not a believer.
I'm not saved, no.
So just tell me your reaction and sort of what you told me before about the anger.
And that's what, as I'm sharing, people have to come to grips with is in 1969, that was the first time I ever actually saw a race riot. People were very upset that Dr. King had been killed. And so violence broke out on campus. And I tell people I had never been in an environment like that where tear gas and bullets and all of that. And I really, as a young 18-year-old, I was 19-year-old, I was too frightened really to do anything. I just kind of stayed in the dorm. And then the following year in 1969, a friend of mine, William Grimes, who used to come by and hang out in my room, and we knew one another, he was gunned down on the campus. It was shot in the back of the head. In fact, it's the longest unsolved murder in the history of Greensboro, North Carolina. Now, it might be solved now, but the last I checked, that's what it was. So when it was my friend, and then this rage came forth that I just wanted to hurt someone because of what had happened to me. So that anger welled up in me at that time. So you have to deal with that and understand how furious you are about something happening to somebody you know. And so when people talk about the current situation of George Floyd, yes, that happened, but I don't know him, but I do know how the people feel who are upset about what has happened.
So talk to me, and you've been honest with me. I know Miss Ollie has given you strict instructions. She said, go easy on Pastor Mark, but you and I have talked. So just talk about what was your reaction back then? Dr. King is assassinated, and then the next year, a friend is killed in an unjust way. Yes. So can you just talk to me as much as you can?
Right. I was outraged. And so the second year, no longer did I stand by. I joined the people who were throwing rocks and because the anger was there. It was like, you're not listening. It wasn't just one thing. It was the housing situation in Greensboro. It was the jobs that we couldn't get, or when we got on the jobs, we weren't treated fair and just. And so it was a combination of things that was happening in me that brought that rage out. And so that's what I wanted to do. Was I wanted to hurt people that was unlike me because of what they had done to my friend. Of course, there was people saying, well, you know, it was an accidental shooting. Maybe the rioters accidentally shot him. And then there was other people who were saying, well, maybe it was the police. We don't know. The facts are that he's dead and that he's on the pavement. And I can't communicate that rage that I felt. So when I tell people, when you're dealing with someone about who has been done wrong, try to at least process what they're going through and to understand what they're going for. Now, it doesn't make it right, but at least try to understand what they are dealing with at that moment.
You said something to me last week. And by the way, if you have questions for Pastor Charles, we have a lot to cover tonight. And I know that we started a few minutes late, but thank you for your patience. If you have questions, please let us know. But you said something to me last week, Pastor, that was so profound. I thought, you know, just because someone else did wrong doesn't make it okay for you to do wrong, but you have to call out what's wrong.
Yes.
That makes sense? Is that what you said?
Yeah, that's what I was saying. I say you can't start with the rioting. You can't start with the effects. You've got to go back to the cause. And because someone has done something wrong, you can't respond that way. And particularly now, we in our environment where we are saved, born again, spirit filled, you still have the anger. And I've spoken to Black pastors around the country, and they still have the anger, but they are going to respond as Christians. They have to deal with what's in their heart. And I think in that conversation that you and I had, I told you, I said, Pastor Mark, I've got to guard my heart. I've got to guard that I still act like a Christian. I still talk like a Christian. Yes, I'm upset. Yes, I'm mad. And you can't turn around what's happening. But this is not new to the African American community, because I could give you several incidents of things that happened. Uh, it's just that we didn't have the technology. We didn't have the cell phones back then to record it. And I think that's what's driving the rage. Is now they're seeing it on camera and on YouTube and
So
internet.
in your life, and as we process a little bit more, and
Okay.
really we could take 3 hours tonight, but in your life, Pastor, you graduate then from college, you work for the EPA, then you become a salesperson for this company, this corporation, and then you're put in a tough spot because it's unlike anything you've ever grown up in. Plus, there's no one that understands your experience, your life experience whatsoever. And then you come to faith in Christ. What point? Before you moved to Carlisle or after?
It was after I moved to Carlisle. I had been in Carlisle approximately 2 years. And as I said, I got married in those 2 years to Miss Ollie. And after we got married, we were having problems in our marriage. And that's what drove us back to, well, she said, well, my mother said, if you got a problem, then go back to church. We went to a Shiloh Baptist church, a little small church there in the city. And upstairs in their Sunday school room is when we gave our hearts to the Lord. So we both got saved at the same time, and we came home, and that was the beginning of our journey. So the last 5 years, I got saved, and so I began to ask the Lord to help me, to help me to deal with the anger, to help me to be a better husband, to help me. And I started reading the Bible. I didn't know anything about the Bible, and I did it all wrong, Pastor Mark. I started at Genesis and just read straight through. I mean, nobody was around to tell me that maybe you need to start at John and then go through and then go back. So, but I was fascinated by the Bible and how it covered so many things in life that we were dealing with. But yes, that's what happened. So those 5 years I was there, I lived there. I tried to act, talk, walk like a Christian, regardless of the situations I would run into.
Okay, I want to delve into some of the situations you and I have talked about. Okay.
Okay.
Because someone had asked a question: how long did it take you to address your anger? And really, what I'm hearing you saying, really, until you met Christ, that anger was still there.
Even after it was there. And I had to process it. I had to manage it. And so I came up with some techniques, to where if I felt something welling up in me, I would just stop talking. I would just go silent. If I don't say anything, then it won't burst forth. This rage won't burst forth. And then being placed in situations sometimes when things are said or done and you want to respond, but you can't respond because if you say anything, you'll probably say the wrong thing.
Reminds me of the scripture, in your anger, do not sin.
Yes.
It doesn't say you're not getting angry at things. I think Jesus got angry, but he didn't sin in his anger.
That's right.
So I have to go a little deeper for Kelvin thing. You know where I'm going. You know where I'm going.
I think I know where you're going. Yeah.
So let's go first of all to Big Walt. Can we?
Yeah, right.
You told me the story years and years ago, and I've never forgotten this story. I've never told it because I can't tell it because I didn't have the experience. But can you tell the story of Big Walt?
Yeah, it was a sales representative for this co-op in Shippensburg, Pennsylvania. And he and I used to work together. And so we worked together quite a bit. I would call on him, we would go out and we would solve complaints. And we had dined together. Our wives had been together at meetings. And so I knew him very well and he knew me very well because we had spent, I think at that point, probably had known one another maybe about 5 years. So we'll call out on a complaint. When we go out to the complaint, one of his customers complaining, we were walking in the alfalfa field looking at whether the product that we were selling was being used. And we're walking and he was telling me about what the man had been telling him that was the problem. And then he made a statement, which I've heard in Pennsylvania, which I've not heard anywhere else. And I won't use what it is, but he mentioned something about in a woodpile, and used a racial slur when he said it. In other words, what the saying means is you're not telling me the whole thing. So he made that statement about someone being in the woodpile. I think because we knew one another for so long, he didn't think about the fact that I was black, Pastor Martin. He was just talking, or maybe it was because he was using the words. But let me tell the story. So when he said it, he immediately caught himself. We walked on in silence in the field. And then he stopped and he turned and he looked at me and he said, Charles, I'm so sorry. I don't use words like that. And he said, would you please forgive me? And I said to Big Walt, I said, well, look, I said, I do. I said, we've known one another a long time. I said, we've broken bread together many times, and our families had broken bread. I know that's not you. And I said, so as far as I'm concerned, if you don't mention it again, I'm not going to mention it again. And we didn't. So we worked probably another 2.5 years, and there wasn't a problem, which is one of the reasons why I don't use certain words in private. Is if I don't use them in private, they won't come out in public. One of my members asked me a little while ago about, Pastor, about speaking or using. I said, well, certain things I just don't say. I just won't let it come out of my lips, because if I'm preaching or teaching or talking, it might accidentally come out, like my friend Big Walt. But we had a very close relationship. Forgiveness was a part of it. I was a Christian at that point. I did not hold it against him. He was a good man, but he made a mistake.
Yeah, I think that, and again, Pastor, I want to thank you so much. I wish I could hug you, but with COVID-19, we can't do that for one reason.
Well, that was what I was saying. I said, I wish I could bring you over to the office and we could sit down one-on-one, but I only go 2 places. I'm either here at the church or I'm at the house, and that's as many places as Miss Alder's going to let me go.
I would say this, though, too, because you have this sort of a continuing moments that you could, even after coming to Christ, really walk off in a whole different direction of anger and frustration.
Yes.
So I want to go a little deeper if we can, a couple more things, okay?
Okay.
So this is now, I mean, you're there in Carlisle, and you at times were passed over on different promotions. Yes. And in your company, even though you're hardworking, you felt like you had to work doubly hard, but at the same point too, it's like you said to me that people weren't noticing.
That's right.
And other people who were lazy were getting promoted, and you weren't getting promoted.
Yes.
So, I mean, you're a believer at this time.
Yes.
How do you deal with that?
Well, one of the things I did, Pastor, is I always did everything as unto the Lord. So even if you don't recognize me as being good at my job, I'm still going to do my job the best I can as unto the Lord. So as I learned my craft of sales, how to use, back in those days, how to use open-end questions and close-end questions and how to make a close, and I did everything unto the Lord. And plus I had no reference. I didn't know, everyone told me I was normal. So I was average. So I believed that I was average, even though up until a point. Now I'll tell you what happened is a salesman from another company had come through, and he worked for this company for a while, and he was getting ready to go. He covered a larger territory. So he got all of Virginia and down into the Shenandoah. So he covered all the Eastern Shore. So he covered like 5, 6, 7 territories. And he was getting ready to go leave, and he took another job. So we run into one another at the gas pump. And he said, oh, I'm leaving. I said, well, I'm sorry to hear that. I said, well, I enjoyed competing against you. And he said to me, he said, well, I just want to let you know, Charles, he said, of all the Ciba-Geigy salesmen I competed against, he said, you, and he mentioned another guy, Mike Boyd, he said, you guys were the 2 toughest that I run in contact with. And it's at that point that I realized, okay, I'm pretty good. I'm kind of realizing that I'm good at what I do, but that was my first indication that I was good, but my ratings still were average.
But then you actually found out even later when you became head over some other people that these guys were being promoted, and because they were not, from your experience, they were not Black. Yes. They were being promoted for that other reason.
That's right. And see, and what happened is I had a boss, Gene Lead, and I'm using names. I guess they're around, but Gene came and traveled with me. He was on my boss for about a year, but he recognized the skills that I had, and he began to promote that in the home office and let them know. And it was because of his work that I got a chance to get promoted at that time. Again, I think it was 1979. That's how I ended up down here. I interviewed for about 3 different jobs. So one is a national sales training, one is a district sales manager down in Texas, and then this was the 3rd time I interviewed in this area as for a district sales manager. And he was the reason that I got promoted into my position, is because of his work in terms of letting people know about my skills. But then it was a whole new set of things I had to deal with. All of a sudden, I'm in charge of a district. I've got 7 salesmen, 5 are white and 2 are black. I was the first, and at the time I was there, the only black salesman in the country for 7.5 years. They had about 30-some districts throughout the United States of America and Hawaii. And so again, I found myself as the only one. Now, I would see black people because of the travel, and I would interact with black people because 2 of my salesmen were black. But still, I had to deal with some of those same things in the meetings that I was in, and some of the resorts and the uptown places, and where we would eat and where we would sleep. But I still ran into different situations that happened because I was black.
You had someone who actually shared here online. We had the same story, Pastor Charles. Someone else can relate. So you're helping people process.
Yeah.
Because I think that's we have many conversations, and we need to continue having conversations. What I've always loved about you, Pastor Charles, is a relationship that we have. We could say anything to each other. Yes. Now, we're not going to say everything we would normally say to each other online.
Yes.
But we talk very openly about things, and we thank God for that. But can I say, and someone said to me here on Facebook, I love it when you said you're doing your work as under the Lord. And
okay.
So as a believer in Jesus Christ, even when you're seeing that happen, I mean, you're a man, you're a driven man. To be a salesman, you have to be driven. And you have this inside of you. Did you just keep giving that over to God every day, or when it came up, how did you deal with it? Or how for all those years especially?
Well, one of the things I did, Pastor, was well, the pattern back in those days was, and you remember this was 30 years ago, is someone would take you up under their wings and they would teach you the job, kind of mentor you. But nobody would mentor me when I arrived on the scene. So I was always by myself. I didn't have an older district manager, even though there was about 7 guys. And at that time, the Northeast region, which I was in, went all the way down to Kentucky, Ohio, up to Michigan. None of them really took me under their arms. And so I'm praying, I'm depending on the Bible, and I'm asking, Lord, you got to help me. How do I manage people? How do I be fair and just? How do I be equitable to the people that are with me? And so the Lord had me to start to look into the scripture. So I began to study the life of David. Wow. And how he managed his men, and how he responded to his men, and how he acted with his men. And I used that as my model until later on I was able to get some of the older guys to help me when they saw that I wasn't going to fail, or I wasn't going to get fired. Then they started to open up to me a little bit. But I used David as my basis. And what I noticed about David was that it said over and over again, David inquired of the Lord. He asked of the Lord. So when I was faced with a difficult situation, instead of making it black or white, I would ask, is it right or wrong? Wow. Is it fair or just? And then let God help me to process that in that manner. And so once I did that, then the Lord gave me kind of a format. He was saying that if you make your decisions where they're fair or just, regardless of who you're dealing with, is it a fair decision and is it a just decision? And then he told me, he said, and when you implement it in a kind manner. Wow. So even if I had to fire you, I was going to be kind. I'm not going to be mean, because I know that you've got children in college. I know that you've got a wife. And so I'm going to try to convince you that maybe sales is not your calling. Maybe the technical areas, or retail, or some other area. And maybe you want to try the county agent. Maybe you want to try over here instead of here. And that's what he did with me. Is he would challenge me with is it fair or just? I give you one example, which I don't think we talked about. I had a salesman that was shipped back over here to my district from the West Coast. And I actually had hired him many years back in Pennsylvania. And And that was hard. He went out. He got promoted to DM, to being the district manager way before me, even though I hired him. But anyway, things didn't work out. And he came back, and so when he came back, he was upset about everything being demoted and all. And at one point, he said, "Well, look, I'm just gonna submit my resignation." And I said, "Look, I don't want you to submit your resignation. I said, here's what I want you to do. I want you to work for me. If you'll work for me and team with the other guys, then we'll be okay. I'm not trying to fire you. I'm trying to make you successful." And so God had to deal with me on things like that. Even though he was resisting me, even though he was being disrespectful, disobedient, he was breaking some company rules. Instead of going by the letter of the law, what I did was the Lord had me to love him back. I was a Christian at that point, to love him back into the fold, Pastor Martin.
You know, I think the people who are watching right now know why I respect you so much, because of just even the phrase, you did it under the Lord, and you made it not black and white, but right and wrong, and what's just and what's not just. And I feel like this is why I felt very, very strongly I wanted so much to have you here and just talk a little bit.
Well, we're getting into some conversations that I think should be had all around America between black men and also white men. I tell my fellow white pastors that if you really want to understand what is happening and how we're feeling, spend some time with a black pastor. Listen to what they're saying. I mean, we've got many stories that we only repeat to our families, and we don't tell everybody about what is happening because we realize they really can't take it. But we know what it's like to be the only black. We know what it's like to be trailed in grocery stores. We know what it's like to be for the doors to lock when we pull up into a parking lot next to particularly white females. We know what it's like. And what we have to do is come up with something that will allow us to still maintain our dignity as black men and also maintain our walk with the Lord as a Christian brother. And that's the balancing that we have to do. We've got to have some of these real tough conversations to break the cycle. And in light of what is happening here in America, whether you're talking about the George Floyd situation or the Arbery situation with the jogging down in Georgia, it could have just as easily been me. And I can say that because I know what it's like to be trailed by a police car when I'm jogging early in the morning around 5 o'clock in Lynchburg, Virginia. I know what that feels like. I know what it feels like to be stopped and profiled and detained because they say I look like H-Rap Brown. I know those things. Those are some of the things which I don't get into all the stories, but you've got to have these honest conversations. Look, let's close off this first part, and we got part 2 coming up next Wednesday, and you don't want to miss it as we get into some more discussions between pastors, pastor to pastor. But Micah 6:8, it says this: He has shown you, O man, what is good and what does the Lord require of you, but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before the Lord. That's what God requires of us. I like the way that the Message reads on this particular passage. It says, but he already made it plain how to live and what to do. What God is looking for in men and women is quite simply, do what is fair and just to your neighbor. You see, you hear how I use that, fair and just. It's not fair and it's not just to put the knee on the back of a man's neck. Let me go ahead with this. It's quite simple. Do what is fair and just to your neighbor. Be compassionate and loyal in your love, and don't take yourself too serious. And that's what we have to do. We've got to show compassion. We've got to show loyalty of our love for the Lord and our love for our neighbor. And I like this last one. I don't take yourself too serious. I never take myself too serious. What I do, I take serious, my work for the Lord, but I don't take me serious. Look, join us next week as we continue to explore this conversation about racial inequality, about we call it institutional racism, but I guess you guys call it systematic racism. Join us next week, and I pray that this has been a blessing to you. Father, bless them, touch them, open their eyes and their hearts. We ask in Jesus' name. Amen. Join us next week for the close of this. God bless you, Pastor Charles.